G'day there. Until September next year, when we will have elections for a real council, the Central Coast Council isn't a council. It isn't a council at all. It's a one-man administrator appointed by the New South Wales Baird government. Our Central Coast administrator is a Baird-appointee. He owes his job and his $330,000 salary to Baird. Our council is not a council. It's a one-man puppet council with strings. It's tied to the Baird government and will do its bidding. It's not our council of elected representatives. The New South Wales government that has appointed this puppet council is a small government. It is ideologically, which is a bit like religiously, it's ideologically committed to small government, which means that it supports deregulation, and that means taking away the rules, usually wages and working conditions rules. And it's also committed to privatisation, which means turning public services into private businesses. Privatisation turns a public service into a privately provided service, which you pay for directly, where the private provider can be interested in you, but must be interested, first and foremost, in the profit that they make. They make that for themselves and their shareholders. Private means private. Public means for the public or the common good. So why am I making this video? Well, because right now, public lands in New South Wales are being privatised. And I think that if you knew about this, you would want to say no, just like me, and lots of other people too. Here, on the New South Wales Central Coast, our puppet council is changing about 30 public parcels of land to private lands. Things like playgrounds and open reserves, public spaces, a public lookout, essential public car parks. The council wants to sell these off. Developers will be the main beneficiaries. The public, or the common good, will be the victim. It's not just that. You know as well as I know that people with bad motives don't tell you the full story in the beginning. No, at the start they tell you a little piece of the story, and then when we fall for it, they drive a harder bargain and they say, well, we may as well go the whole hog now because you already agreed to a little bit. We call this, don't we, the thin end of the wedge. We know that the wedge has a thin and a thick end. Once the thin end of the wedge is in, it is so much more difficult to stop the wedge being driven in hard all the way to the thick end. Now, the thick end of this wedge is our public beaches, our public national parks and state forests and council reserves and parklands and playgrounds. Please don't think that as is me being an alarmist or sensational. This is already happening in America right now. The extreme right of America politics, from where neoconservatives politicians in Australia, such as Baird and Abbott and Turnbull, get their mangled economic theories. And they're doing it right now. They're putting through legislation to privatise national parks. And if you try to surf a beach along the Californian coast, you will mostly find that you cannot access them because they're privately owned, they're sold off, or you enter through a fence and a gate and you pay a substantial fee to the private owners for the use of what we believe should be a public beach. Now, the thin end of this wedge is exactly what the General Coast Administrator of our puppet council is now doing. And I oppose this. Do you? Mr. Baird has the legislation for this. It passes public lands to his puppet councils and asks them to privatise these, or some of them. Public lands. The Baird government and its council here on the Central Coast are working with developers to sell off quite a lot of public lands. Already, I have them listed on my Facebook page and my website, which is www.vandavy.com, along with photos to show you how wonderful most of them are All these lands were provided for the common good, you and me. They were provided for public purposes, as I have described. Privatisation is mostly nasty. You can tell for yourselves. You know what privatising the Commonwealth Bank has done. Huge and many fees. And every year, record profits of banks at your expense. So much for the common good. Ask our farmers. Check your fees. You know that Baird and Turnbull are destroying our public TAFE. You know that the privatisation of hospitals means that the rich can get quick treatment and pensioners and working families must wait for overworked and underfunded public hospitals. You know they are trying to destroy public schools with starvation of the essential funds. You know what they have done to your electricity bill by privatising the poles and wires. You know the original concept of a fast NBN for the common good has been virtually destroyed. You may not know that our puppet council is thinking of ways of privatising our garbage truck operators. That will be another fight for later this year. A council with no responsibility for garbage collection and costs, give it to the private operators to maximise their profits and to minimise the wages of workers. Do we want that? No, thank you. We need our elected council to be responsible and for our workers to get a decent wage for work that's cleverly done and also safely done. These are big local concerns for the Central Coast. But not just us. It is New South Wales wide. And with the Abbott-Turnbull government wedded to the religious-like ideology of small government, it will be repeated over and over, especially now the elections are done. Public schools, public hospitals, public roads to toll roads, public lands to private developers, and lands owned by private people. National parks to private parks. As Australians, all Australians, we are facing a fight to preserve our public assets. First, we need to protect the thin end of the wedge, or else we lose everything later, including the beaches, national parks, public waterways. What should you do? Well, firstly, we need all to be aware that politics is important. It's not a joke. It is not something just others should be interested in. These matters affect you and your family and your kids' future. Don't just leave it to others. And certainly not to the big parties or corrupting donors or developers that machine the big parties. Secondly, think independent. I don't mean empty-headed independent or even single-issue independent. But I mean think independent to make sure that your politician is not captive to a money woman such as Gina Rinehart or a money man such as John Singleton. You know as well as I do that there's no such thing as a free lunch. Well, big donors do not donate to political parties or even people masquerading as independents. They don't do that because it makes them feel good. They do it because they get a better service. They get access to contracts and policy privileges and ultimately an inside run for money in the hand from political parties and from masquerading independents because they owe them. And thirdly, if you are a Central Coast resident, link up with Facebook pages which support these public lands staying in public hands. You could start with the Facebook page run by Sue Chidgey. And if you are interested in a permanent link to independent political thinking, you can seek to join a Facebook page called Independent and Clean Robertson, which is a closed page for people like you and me. And fourthly, you can contact me at this email, van@vandavy.com, or through my Facebook page, Van Davy. Privatisation is a nasty tool of the ideologically mangled, small government, far-right, of the Liberal Party and sometimes Labor Party. For your public sake, for the common good, the privatisation of public lands should be resisted.